Most traits of neurodiversity begin to show up well before primary school, which is why I am joined today by Sally, who's going to share her experiences with early childhood and neurodiversity. You're about to witness two educators getting pretty vulnerable about working in a neurodiverse world. Tune in.
Hi, I'm Selena Woodward, and I'm an English and drama teacher, university lecturer, and with edufolios.org, a big-time reflective practitioner. So how can reflective practice help you grow your teaching skills, fall in love with your profession all over again, and help you nail accreditation and teacher registration with less stress and less work? Well, this is the Reflective Teacher Podcast.
Hi there, and welcome to the Reflective Teacher Podcast with me, Selena Woodward. We're back and we are focused at the moment on neurodiversity. Why? Because in March this week, we are celebrating neurodiversity. It is, in fact, Neurodiversity Celebration Week, a whole week. Oh my God, we need a little longer than that, because let me tell you, neurodiversity is fascinating. Now, Neurodiversity Celebration Week is all about educating everyone, teachers, parents, children, the world, about what neurodiversity is. Its aim is to educate and help smash away any misinformation and any biases that might be held against someone who is neurodivergent. Educate, enlighten, open our hearts to what it is. And as a teacher, we are going to find ourselves working with neurodivergent children. We may even find ourselves working with neurodivergent teachers, because shockingly, children who are neurodivergent grow up to be adults who are neurodivergent, and often they become teachers, which is quite interesting. I myself am neurodivergent. So, we're going to look at that this week because it's really important. It's a huge part of what we do. It's smattered across the standards, so of course we're going to reflect on it here in the podcast. And you might notice that I am not alone. I am very excited to be joined by Sally. Hi, Sally.
Hello.
Sally is an incredibly experienced early years educator, 18 years working in that field, who is very close to getting her teaching qualification.
Very close.
Woo! So she's doing the next bit. Now, it's very important. But she has a wealth of experience in this area in early years, and of course she's studying across primary with it now, that I really wanted to tap into. A bit like Neurodivergent Celebration Week, she's also on a bit of a mission, is that fair to say?
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah, she's on a bit of a mission. She is passionate about neurodivergency. She's passionate about advocating. She's passionate about developing understanding about the way neurodivergence shows up in early years and how we can advocate that and support both adults and children who find themselves who are neurodivergent or are working in a neurodivergent environment. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Would you add anything to that, Sally?
Yeah, no, I think you did well there.
Thank God. I did my research, people. I did. And I'm really excited to have you here. I would really love to ask you to define for us, in your view, what is neurodivergency? What is it? What the heck is that?
Neurodivergency is a pretty way of saying a particular individual or group of people have different wide brains as such. So our cognition, our executive function, everything doesn't work the same as a neurotypical.
Mm-hmm. So what is, tell me, I'm going to interrupt you there because I know that until I found out my son was neurodivergent and then I went on that journey, I had no idea what executive function was. And I've been teaching for 12 years by that point. So can you just explain what that is?
So executive functioning is basically your working memory, your sensory, your it's everything pretty much, like your concentration, your focus. It affects every part of your life, and I don't think a lot of people realize how much it affects a person's life. So I know for me it definitely affects my everyday life, but I never really understood it. Just like you said, like you go years not really understanding what executive function is or neurodivergency is, and now it's like I've awakened my brain to all this knowledge and realized that this is me. So
How does your executive function show up for you? How does it show up as an issue? What do you do?
I am inattentive type ADHD. So for as long as I can remember, I have almost been a very withdrawn, shy young girl, because I would daydream all the time. I was distracted all the time, but that was dismissed in a classroom because usually people think ADHD is a naughty boy that, bouncing off the walls, and I was the complete opposite. But I always knew that I saw the world differently, and I had, stronger social justice views and feelings than what other people do. But I thought, oh, maybe that's just me. But no, it's not. Apparently, there's a whole community of us.
Actually, it's a yeah, absolutely. I know for me, my executive function shows up with really over the top having to control things so I know where things are, because if I don't, which means
I've got a few of those.
I remember when I was teaching, and my neighbour wanted to be a teacher, and she wanted to come and spend some time in my classroom, and she walked into my classroom and went, "Oh my God, this is just like your living room, stuff everywhere." No, there is stuff everywhere, but it's chaos, but it is organised chaos.
Yeah, it's like controlled chaos, yeah.
And it
I
makes
understand
so much sense
that, yeah.
You understand that? Yeah. I know another thing is I cannot stand silence. Exam moderation is torture for me. The idea of staying in a hall for an hour and not being able to speak, not be able to make any noise is really hard. I have to play a game, because I'm at high school, I have to play the game of the kid raises their hand. I have to imagine I'm racing my colleague and I've got to get there first. That's how I keep my brain. I can't.
Your own little games.
Yeah, I have to play my games. And if my kids need to do silent reading, I have to have quiet music on. Like, I can't. I need that stimulation to focus. Yeah. It's really interesting. So all of these things I used to think made me a bit weird. But actually, I'm not weird. I just am wired differently. This is neurodivergence. Where if my head of department, if I was playing music, she couldn't concentrate. I would have it blaring in my classroom and she'd come and tell me to turn it down because she's marking after school, and I'd be like, oh, how can you concentrate with that music? It's these little signals that you're like, oh, okay, our brains work differently.
A bit differently, yeah.
And as a teacher, our job is to help kids to learn, and that obviously involves the brain. And so, I think it's fascinating, like you're saying, that neurodiversity is really about how our brain is wired and how there are different labels for those different ways of wiring a brain. Like you said, you've got ADHD, and there are several types of that as well, aren't there? It's not just ADHD. Yeah.
But sometimes you can also have ADHD and you might have a learning disability, or you might have autism. Like, it somehow all intertwines into one. But you might not necessarily have all of them. But yeah,
it's true, and they cross over too.
They do a lot.
Yeah. So there are traits of autism in giftedness. There are traits of ADHD in giftedness and in autism. Then you often find that there's dyslexia, dyspraxia, all of these labels and these words that you may have heard. That's what we're talking about today. That is all about neurodiversity. Okay?
Yeah.
So Sally here has been working in that field for 18 years in early years, and I'm really fascinated by that because as a mom who has a neurodivergent child, at the time I wasn't really skilled up in neurodiversity either, because I was born in the 80s and went to school in the 80s and the 90s, showing my age here, don't care, where nobody cared about that kind of stuff. And like you, I was the good girl. I followed the rules. I was talented, so I was always in the paper doing amazing things for the school. Very big emotions, but had learned how to behave by studying very hard. A lot of my energy used to go into trying to please everybody else around me by watching social cues. And I'm lucky that my brain works quickly, because that is really hard work to do that and learn at the same time. Whew. It's hard, you hear me, right? So, I think it's interesting in early years when kids are still developing their social skills, that is the time when those developmental milestones are being watched like a hawk. As a high school English teacher, I couldn't really tell you what the developmental milestones, apart from the hormone changes that go on. Like, we're not reporting on that, right? And Standard 1.1 is all about the social, developmental characteristics of kids and how they learn. So I'll be really interested in your perspectives of what that looks like in the early years environment. What does that look like?
Well, it's funny. I've always had, I don't know if you have it too, but like a bit of an intuition when it comes to reading people. Yeah? And I think I've just always had that, but I never really connected being neurodivergent. But I think because of that, I'm able to read children better and understand, if they're being sad, angry, all the emotions. And the things that I usually look for are usually the ones that I presented in early childhood, in my, school years growing up, is that I would seclude myself. I was very quiet, but I was also very distracted. Or if I found a topic that I liked talking about, it was like, blah, blah, blah. Like I just had to say it all in one paragraph and people would be like, what? And I think now that I've noticed those things in myself and my past and my own children, that now I'm finding it easier to see in other children in the early years. And, 8 times out of 10, I'm usually right. So it's good to know that because I understand it, I can then teach other educators to understand it and what to look for, and so forth. But it can be tricky because every neurodivergent child has different ways of presenting their behaviours. I've spoken to parents where the child has completely different behaviours at home and then completely different behaviours in a social environment. I remember one family I was speaking to, their daughter sort of unmasked at home. All the behaviours are at home. But in a classroom, she's masking. She's a completely different child. So that's when it's really tricky to pick it up as well. But things like speech, balance, really strong interests about things, just sort of, the whole understanding my own brain has helped me understand other children's brains. So, but it's a tricky balance. It is hard to pick up in the early years, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, and I guess you guys are watching really carefully in those milestones in the framework. And so, obviously not every child is going to follow that trajectory.
No.
Some children will learn to speak later than others. That's all really normal. Doesn't necessarily mean there's a neurodivergence. But there will come a point where you start questioning, like, sensory seeking behaviour. Do you see that a lot?
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. They always constantly need to have something in their hand, or they want Play-Doh all the time, or they want to be playing with the paint all the time. We've got one child that is in my kinder room at the moment, and she loves artwork because it's sensory, because you can touch it, you can create it, you can manipulate it. And, that's a big sign as well that they crave that sensory aspect of learning. So I really try and input that into the room as well with children.
So, reflecting on that, you got to constantly do that, what we do all the time here, Edufolios and in the podcast, which is observe, don't judge, be curious, and reflect and go, interesting, can I see some patterns here? What happens if I change things up? I know one kid, for example, where if I offered them a biscuit, they wouldn't be interested, but if I offered them a bowl of mashed potato, they'd be in there like, no, because it's squishy, and they get their hands in there and they want to touch it. Biscuits, normally kids love those. That kind of thing. Or the opposite, they're really averse to the squishy stuff. And they can't cope with that. It's overstimulation for them.
Even like loud music or really overstimulating sounds or too many children in the same room, you can notice straight away which child is getting more overwhelmed than the other. And you just sort of have to reflect and go, okay, how can I help this child? It's too much for them. It's too much for me. Let's go outside. Yeah. And
that's good. Learning breaks could be an important part. And of course, this is all part of knowing your students and understanding how they learn. And, it comes down to things like some of the behaviours that we expect in classrooms, like sitting still, sitting nicely with our hands in our lap. If I have a neurodivergency and it's going to take a particular there are a few I can think of where just doing that is probably going to take 95% of my brain effort. And if you're asking me to concentrate on that and fulfill what you need from me and learn something new, you are going to make it really hard for me to learn something new, because what I need to do is move, or I need to walk around, or I need to play with something, and maybe I can't make eye contact with you. Maybe I don't learn if I'm looking in your eyes, and this is what I mean. Like neurodivergency means you might have different ways of being, different ways of communicating. So when it comes to, knowing how those intellectual developmental characteristics of neurodiversity may affect learning, it's actually really important to be aware of some of those patterns of behavior and not judge them as behavior issues sometimes. Yeah,
and you'll find too, when you role model those behaviors and you give them choice and support and guidance, the children in the environment also do the same thing. So I've worked with a lot of children that maybe are non-verbal and they need a bit of extra support, but I show that understanding, I show that connection, and the other children embrace it. And I think that's beautiful, but it needs to continue. So it's all about educating the families and the educators and the community, and just accepting children and people for who they are, because it's super important.
Absolutely, because people with neurodivergences have amazing superpowers, because they do see the world differently, and there's a lot to be said for that. Now, when it comes to identifying those different characteristics, I guess, and sometimes those are intellectual ones, like I've talked about my son many times. My son's brain is wired like a race car when it comes to learning. He learns really, really quickly. He does not need you to do the same task 4 times to make sure it goes into his long-term memory. It goes into his long-term memory almost instantly. He used to tell me he has a filing cabinet that is divided by year. He can just open his imaginary and pull something out. That's great, but what if I've got a kid who has low processing memory, and that's a real issue? And so yes, I do need to repeat that 20 times, because I've got to bypass the short-term memory and get it all the way into the long-term memory if they've got to be able to move forward. So how do you see that showing up? Because to me, that kind of leans towards 1.5 and differentiation for those different characteristics. Can you give us some examples of how that shows up?
I guess it's sitting back and reflecting and going, okay, what does this child need right now? For instance, at the moment, I've got a child in my care and he constantly asks all day, when's mum come? When's mum coming? Like, it really gets to you, especially when you're already sensory sensitive. But I go, okay, he needs to sort of have a concept of the time of day and how we're going to do that. So I made this huge visual timetable routine so he could see what part of the day we were up to, and sort of like a countdown to home time. And now he just goes over there on his own and he can see what's happening throughout the day. And it's completely changed him. He's not as anxious anymore because he has a concept of time, and we're supporting that need. So it is just sitting back and going, okay, what can I do for this child? Collaborate with your team as well. Come up with those ideas, put them in place. If they work, they work. If they don't, they don't. And you just keep going back and forth. But it is hard in an early childhood setting because there are a lot of children, a lot of different needs. So it's just working together, and eventually you do find something that works for that child, and it makes their day easier, our day easier, and so forth.
Yeah, visual timetables are a really common thing.
Amazing.
Another thing that I've seen trending at the moment is people making those clocks where it's got 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and they've been colouring in the different sections. So we're learning to hear then this bit's pink for break time, then we're learning this bit's pink for break time, then we've got learning, and then the bottom bit is a completely different colour because that's your time at home. So the kids can see the hand moving. Absolutely. So visuals are really important, which is really cool, because if we're going to reflect on this with the standards, see standard 3.5 is all about that non-verbal communication in a classroom. So there's an opportunity there to reflect on your learning space and the way that's communicating with your students, whether they be neurodivergent or not. I mean, as a neurodivergent educator, what does a classroom need for you to function in it well?
I need organisation, but I think of the term less is more. I find a lot of educators will pack their room full of resources when they really don't need to, because then children sort of go, okay, what's next? And I'm the same. I'm like, oh, what are we going to do now? So I sort of make it really structured and organised so everything has its place, but also children have choice. So like a puzzle self-help shelf where you can choose what puzzle you want and then put it away at the end of the day, and everything's organised, got its place, you know where to go. I find things like lighting, sound, sometimes I need to change it throughout the day for myself or even the children. It's just little adjustments that work for me and for them, because they get overstimulated just as much as we do.
Yeah, I mean, I love loud, crazy environments, but not all my kids do. And so I need to remember that. Like, I love noise. I love working fast-paced. My brain needs me to be able to fire ideas a million times. I'm a very visual person, a very kinesthetic person, but not everyone in my classroom is going to cope with me if I'm like that all the time, right?
Yeah.
So that goes whether you're neurodivergent or not. We all have a way of being. We always have our style of teaching. And I know when you start to reflect on who your kids are in your classroom, what their needs are, how you need to differentiate your approaches, going back there to 1.5, how your communication in your classroom in terms of displays and colours and sounds and lights, all that nonverbal. You're right, like you've got to think about what you need, what your kids need, and maybe you need to show up differently. If you're a high school teacher like me, lesson by lesson, you might be slightly different depending on who you've got in your class, which is, again, a talent that you get as a neurodivergent human, because, like you say, you spend a lot of time carefully monitoring other people's reactions so you can try and gauge whether or not you're too much or you're too loud, because you've learned that you need to fit this box. And that's not very healthy, but, that's something that happens a lot.
Yeah. I think it's important to take those opportunities to teach the children about your needs, because often we take into consideration their needs all the time, but sometimes they might notice that, like, I don't want you in my face right now, and they sort of say, why? Explain it to them, be truthful to them, and I do. I say, look, my needs are a bit different to yours. I have ADHD. There's nothing wrong with teaching children about neurodivergency. If anything, it's the best time to do it in early childhood. So I'm pretty open about who I am with other people. Other people might not want to share those parts of them, and that's fine. But they've got to know your boundaries as well. So that's really important.
Yeah, boundaries are really important regardless of diversities, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think, if there was a kid who finds out they're ADHD and they've met a teacher who's ADHD and that's normalised, then that's awesome. Yeah,
exactly.
It's like there's no coming back to the idea of celebrating neurodiversity and the talents of neurodivergent people. Of course, that would make sense. Absolutely. If you're lucky enough to know as an adult that you that you have a diagnosis. Some of us don't know until much later in life. Absolutely. I mean, the last thing I want to talk about with you, really. I mean, I think there's two things actually that have come up for me. One is, there's the standard, which is 1.6, which is all about disability. And it's a really interesting one, because when we're reflecting on that at any career stage, often people assume that disability is a physical disability, or, it's a really tricky one. And what's really interesting about neurodivergency is that not all neurodivergencies are disabilities, and some are. And that's really hard. So, for example, do you want to talk to that, or?
I think it can be tricky, because I know for myself, whatever I'm going through in my life at the time could impact my working ability a bit more. And then other times I will be, hitting high fives and, gold stars every day. So I think it depends. With ADHD and autism, it can differentiate throughout your life and what you need. So, yeah, it is a tricky balance. So... But it does impact your life. It impacts my life every day, and it's just finding what works for you, learning how to communicate. Hey, look, I'm not struggling today. What can you do to help me? Build that support around you too.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking through all of the paperwork, the only one that seems to be labelled as a disability is autism. Dyspraxia, dyslexia. Those ones are a difficulty, but not a disability. So being gifted is not even counted, because the paper, the policies, if we're going to go to Standard 7, describes that you have to be behind your peers in order to be... But if you're ahead, that can be just as damaging socially, emotionally. it can be really damaging for your mental health if you are really being held back and it's really frustrating and you're bored and now your behavior is terrible. So now you're learning that you're this kind of person, but actually you just don't know how to communicate your needs. I find it really interesting that we seem to have not considered that is equally in education. I really think that's a huge conversation that needs to happen. And so when you're reflecting on this stuff, autism is probably the only one that you can tag with 1.6, and yet there are a lot of the similar accommodations or differentiation that you need to make across the different ones, because it's the same process like we were talking about of what do you need, what is happening. It's almost here, like curious.
It's almost like you've got to jump through all these hoops to just be like, oh, okay, yeah, you do need extra support, but we shouldn't have to feel like we have to tick every box just to validate who we are and how our brains work. And I think that's pretty frustrating.
It's also hard if you have a child who has a neurodivergency and you're being told by the school that there's no funding for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every child matters. Every child matters. And I think if we're going to celebrate and look at that we need to maybe stand up as a professional a little more and stay curious and seek more support, because it is really hard already, but the chances are that in every 32 kid classroom there are probably like 10% of the population is gifted, let's put it that way. So like in theory, that's something like 200,000 kids in South Australia should be gifted if you're going to use the stats, but I bet they're not identified or supported, and it's interesting when you start looking at the numbers. Or
they just consider that their needs are just fine, like they'll be fine, they'll go through school, no problem. But it's not like that at all.
No, it's fascinating, and I would encourage everybody listening this week to go and get curious about this. That's why I wanted to bring Sally on, particularly in the early years. It's really tricky in the early years because they are so little, but at the same time you get all these little clues, don't you, at the same time, which are so valuable, and of course will often lead to a child being referred to a psychologist or whatever relevant body in OT to be assessed, to find out whether there's something there. And the reason that we do that as a parent is not because we want a label, it's because it helps us to understand how that child's brain is wired, what accommodations we need, what differentiation we need to put in to support that child's learning needs. So I think if you're taking anything from this podcast, at least go, oh, okay, that's an interesting one. It's diverse. That's interesting, And I guess that brings me to my final thing, which is working with parents.
Yep.
I'm imagining in early years, you're the first line of, let's be curious.
Yes.
Something is a bit different.
Yes.
And I know as a parent, that can be really hard, really confronting, really scary. Sometimes it's scary because you don't realise. Like if you've just got one child, then that's been normal as far as you're concerned. Yeah. What do you mean? There's lots of reasons why it's really confronting. Do you have any experiences or advice around parental communication, around these things? How to bring that up?
I've had a lot of negative experiences with my own daughter. So when she entered primary school, she was having a lot of trouble with her emotional regulation, but the support was next to nothing. It almost felt like parent blame, and the guilt was just horrible. It was really horrible. But now I'm sort of exploring that, there's other parents out there that feel exactly the same way because they don't feel supported. There's no community around them. So when I engage with a family from a teacher perspective, I make sure I take that into consideration, and I make sure I educate them too, and just say, there's nothing wrong with your child, but they're going to need different things to put into place to help them throughout their schooling years, and it's reassuring them. But it's tricky because you do get the odd parent that doesn't want to hear about it, their child, there's nothing wrong with them, but that's not what we're trying to say at all. So but yeah, I definitely see things from both sides for sure.
It's interesting, isn't it, that language, there's something wrong, there's nothing wrong. That's exactly what Neurodivergent Week is about. There's nothing wrong with being neurodivergent. It literally means your biology is different. You are wired neurologically differently. That's not wrong. It's not right.
Yep.
There's no wrong or right. It's just different. And yet the stigma is there through generations and generations of the label equaling something that it is not anymore.
I'll share a little story with you. So when I was in primary school, it must have been maybe prep or grade 1. I still remember it to this day. I was the teacher's pet, the people pleaser, the quiet one. And so I would just sort of, sit at my desk all quiet, yes, sir. And for that, they sat me next to a boy who demonstrated the opposite behaviour, which was boisterous, sometimes aggressive, couldn't sit still. And now I look back at it, I'm like, we were both ADHD and nobody saw me. Nobody realised that. And it's just so ironic that, that happened back in those years, and it's changed so much to now. But yeah, just really, really funny story, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how girls often present very differently to boys
so
too.
Different. Yeah.
And that body of research into neurodiversity is often focused on boys. And so it's only in recent times that there have been specific studies on girls. We're really only learning now how that presents differently. So this is a beautiful field of exploration and curiosity. I like what you had to say about the community side, going back to the parents as well. I think that's really good idea. Connecting parents to communities where there are other people who understand them, understand what's going on, because that normalizes things. It normalizes things.
Well, I would have loved to have some sort of friendships or support group around me of other parents that were going through the same thing, but I didn't know where to find it. I didn't know they existed, but now I know that they do exist, and it does need to be spoken about more, because I can only imagine what it would feel like if you're a solo parent and you're feeling this guilt and you're feeling hopeless. You need to know that support's there.
Absolutely. Are there any particular groups that you would recommend that you usually send parents to?
I think, honestly, there's a lot of Facebook groups these days, and that's how I got onto a lot of people in sort of starting these conversations. And then, putting it out there, I actually discovered people around me that I didn't even know had neurodivergent children, or they were neurodivergent themselves. So sometimes you do just have to put yourself out there, and then you just attract your people. It's
absolutely.
I know you know what I mean. You just know your people.
Yeah, you do. And it's funny when you spend your whole life trying to be this person that you think people want. You attract the wrong people, and it feels weird. And then when you have the courage, I guess, to be yourself, you attract the right people. I mean, that's just normal life, right? And then I think part of celebrating neurodiversity is allowing people to be themselves and not saying you talk too much, you're too loud, you're too quiet, too much, too something, you should. Obviously there are desired behaviors, and there are also developmental characteristics, intellectual characteristics that mean that some of those things are harder or not necessary, or could be the complete opposite for you. Like I was saying, the kid, most of us would consider a quiet room where we sit still the best environment for learning. That is not my best environment for learning. That's my brain's going to be busy, not on what I'm supposed to be doing. So I need music, I need my headphones in. Other kids the noise is too much, they need noise cancelling headphones. This is the beauty of it. As an educator, I love it, because it's another thing to be explorative about. It's another reason to reflect deeply and see what you can find out so you can meet their needs. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of the communities, because that's a shared wisdom then. You're not alone. You got to find people who get it, and you're also going to learn faster as you accelerate each other through those conversations. I think that's fantastic. Awesome. So if you have any final words out there for early years educators about neurodiversity, what would it be? If you got a tip for them or a statement you'd like to leave us with?
Just to embrace every child and to connect with every child, and not to look at every behaviour as negative, because I hear a lot of educators saying, they're attention seeking, but we have to think of it as connection seeking, and they are. Make that connection with them, and being different is beautiful. If we were all the same, how boring would it be? So embrace those differences, make them feel valued, and, you know, make yourself feel valued too.
Yeah, powerful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Give yourself the freedom to be you and model that beautifully for the next generation. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sally, for your time today.
Thank you.
It's been so much fun talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, if you're listening and you've enjoyed what you've heard today, you can find the show notes for this episode over on edufolios.org/podcast. Use the search box, type in neurodiverse, it's a spelling test. Type in ADHD, any keyword like that, you will find this podcast. Keep tuning in this week as we get more insights and experts and experiences on this fascinating subject. And don't forget to share your thoughts as we go by commenting on this on YouTube, sharing them on Twitter, or even on Facebook. We are always open to hearing your stories. At Edufolios, we are all about stories. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you love us, give us a like or a subscribe, and we will see you this time next week on the Reflective Teacher Podcast. Take care.